everyone. This is Talk Back. It is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, a beautiful summer day in New England, but not a beautiful day in some of the towns around the country. The culture wars are getting us down. And sadly, our own community of Colchester, Connecticut is in the news, and not for good reasons. We have a controversy surrounding what books should be in the library. And when you start to hear that, you start to think, oh my God, censorship, authoritarianism, First Amendment rights, library rights, academic freedom. All of those questions are swirling around us. And Colchester is really just an example of what's happening around the country. It's sad it's come to us. I call it the Trumpification of Colchester, both in culture and politics. But let's take a look at three community leaders in Colchester who are trying to make a difference and trying to help us get through this in the best possible way. Let me introduce today friends from Colchester. First, Bernie Denler. Hi, Bernie. Good to see you
Sheila.
on the screen. And MJ Lawton. Hi, MJ. Good to hear
Hi,
you
Sheila.
and see you. Hi. And Amy D'Amica. Hi, Amy. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, great. So let me just tell you a little bit about each one of these people so you have a little introduction about this. So Amy has been in Colchester her whole life. She is now on the CORE, C-O-R-E commission in town, also Parks and Recs. She belongs to the Historical Society. She was on the Board of Education. She volunteers. She's a fantastic public citizen. She's an insights manager. She has many experience in quality analytics across many industries. She has an MA in management and public relations from Emerson College, a BA in communications from the University of Connecticut, and a lot more, but we only have a few minutes to talk. Bernie, what about Bernie? Bernie lives in Colchester with his husband. He also hosts a new Facebook little live web series called What's Happening, Colchester, What's Happening show on local issues. And he's gotten a lot of traffic these last few weeks because of all of the controversies. He's been on the Board of Finance and the Economic Development Commission and works in the First Selectman's office for a neighboring town. And Bernie told me he just is living in and renovating his grandmother's home in Colchester on the green. How lovely is that? And now MJ Lawton, what can we say about her? Well, she's lived in Eastern Connecticut for 33 years. She's a rising executive leader, 15 years of experience in healthcare, project management, and strategy development. She's an advocate for human rights and health equity with a special focus on issues in her own corner of the world. She's been very outspoken in Colchester. And we'll talk about the book brigade, the banned book brigade, which she's involved in. Her most important work is to be a good person and help others through kindness, courage, and creativity. She lives in Colchester with her husband, 2 dogs. Oh, 1 dog, 2 sons, 1 dog, and
Yes.
2 cats. Okay.
And they're all boys.
They're all boys. Okay. So I'm going to just put this up on the screen because this is how the controversy started. But this is not just what the controversy is about because there are bigger issues at stake. So can you guys see this? Who is RuPaul? Right?
Yeah.
You see that? So let's say I'll start with you, MJ. Just give us a little, a teeny synopsis of how this controversy began in Colchester, surrounded with this book.
Sure. So from my perspective, I got a text from my husband in the middle of the workday saying, "Hey, you're not going to be too happy when you see what was posted on Facebook from the First Selectman about a book in the library." And so, that instantly caught my interest. I looked at Facebook, looked at the post, and was really appalled. And my wheels started spinning pretty quickly about, all right, this can't stand. I feel like I need to say something, do something, and what can I do next? And that was all within a matter of hours. I had made some phone calls to some other resources, including some small independent bookstores, started reaching out in the community to understand where other people might be feeling similarly to me. And, the rest has sort of taken off from there. I will say that wasn't my first concerning social media post or news out of our current administration. But given the events over the past few months, it felt like a time for me to step forward. And frankly, I've said this to other people. It's not that I have the time to devote to this. It's that it has to have, there has to be people who are willing to make the time. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so let's unpack it a little more with Bernie. You're a Democrat who's run for office and sadly lost, and you know that in our last municipal election in Colchester, the Republicans swamped the Democrats and took over all of the local positions, including first selectman. And we know that this is not the first time that this first selectman has violated his duties of office and overstepped his authority. He did so in the whole issue of the recount, where he made a deal with a lawyer, hired a lawyer without necessary approval from the rest of the Board of Selectmen, and made agreements that way beyond his authority. So this is nothing new for this individual. But now that he's getting into the culture wars and he's stepping on territory of First Amendment and freedom of speech, all of that we have to do away with. So Bernie, tell us what the story is regarding your view of what happened with the first selectman.
Well, it's sort of hard to know where to begin with the story, because I think that, as MJ pointed out, there have been developments happening for several months, really since this administration came into office, that sort of pointed that we were headed in this direction. It was a very, very conservative campaign. The current first selectman has never shied away from his conservative leanings and ideology. Similarly to MJ, the first thing that I saw was the Facebook post, which was vague enough that it didn't say what the book was, but you could see that there was the hints of the dog whistles that we are seeing in other parts of the country and other towns in Connecticut when it comes to books that have LGBT content, where there is this narrative that we need to protect the children from something. And it's always sort of ambiguous what it is, at least when politicians talk about it. When some of their supporters come out of the woodwork and they talk about it, the conversation gets more explicit. The language becomes that gay people are grooming children, that they are pushing their lifestyles on kids, that this is happening in schools, in libraries, in the media. And so we've seen this push around the country to target gay people in those kinds of environments. We saw in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill. We've seen in libraries around the country, and even here in Connecticut, not just in Colchester, where people have made an effort to have books targeted at children that have LGBT themes removed from library shelves and school shelves. So when we saw this narrative coming out that something was being removed from the library under the guise of protecting children, and that the first selectman had announced an audit of all of the content in the children's library, which, mind you, is tens of thousands of books, it seemed likely that it was probably going to be something in this vein. And sure enough, it came out that the book in question is a children's book titled Who is RuPaul? It's part of a series of books, children's biographies. They've got everybody from the Pope to Michelle Obama and, of course, RuPaul. Now, the first selectman's pretext for talking about this book is not RuPaul and drag queens. He claims that there is a sexually provocative image in the book, which is a cartoon rendition of a RuPaul advertisement from either the late 80s or early 90s. So that's the pretext here. But then the language that's used to talk about it is the exact same language that we see all over the country when it comes to targeting LGBT people and LGBT children. So I think that's where the story is right now for me.
Okay, so it's important to note that the story is important for you in terms of targeting LGBTQ people, books, culture, and so forth. That clearly is happening in this country. But I think the issue is even greater than that because we have the same things happening all around the country in libraries and school libraries with school boards involving racism issues, involving how much people can teach about what happened to America with slavery, with Reconstruction, with the Civil Rights Movement. We have to be careful now about how we talk about those things. There are issues about how we treated our Native Americans, and so that it's an overarching issue of freedom of expression and the right wing movement toward authoritarianism and toward banning books and burning books. So I think we want to, we want to expand it further because I dare say that our first selectman would go beyond the LGBT community. If this struck a good chord for his citizenry, he would go further and use it for other subjects as well. Amy, what are your comments on this? Amy, you have to unmute yourself.
There I am. Thank you. I think I echo a lot of what has been said here. The language was definitely suspect. The method of delivery was definitely suspect, going right on Facebook. And that's where the concern really is. There's a process in place. There's a process so that if a parent has a question on a book, you take it to the librarian, you fill out a form, you have a conversation about it. That wasn't followed. There wasn't even a question of whether we were asking the questions of anyone. What's the procedure when something like this happens? And that just speaks to it not really following the chain of command, that there should be a process where this is done. If you want to do it on the up and up, this is how you go about doing that. Furthermore, from my perspective, what somebody's beliefs are, if somebody wanted to comment on the book and have it reviewed, okay, have it reviewed. I'm not going to look into what your heart says or something, but we want to make sure our libraries stay a safe place for LGBTQ kids, patrons, community members, just a place where people can go, they can see themselves reflected back, they're welcome, visible, and that's not in question. To say that we're having an investigation into sexually explicit material that just happens to be RuPaul, the drag queen, kind of indicates that there's something dirty about that, and it shouldn't be front and center in the library, and it's not worthy of that consideration. And I want to make sure, my feeling is I want to throw open the doors of the library and say, come on in, everybody's welcome here. And I think that was definitely put on trial with this.
So Amy, I want you to tell us what is CORE and how does CORE and that organization relate to this issue?
So I am here today as Amy, the individual. I'm not here speaking for CORE. I am a member of the CORE organization. It is Colchester's openness to respecting equity. Following the murder of George Floyd, a group of townspeople got together. There were selectmen, there was pastors, there were, parents. It was a community effort to have a committee to decide if Colchester needed to have a group in place, a commission in place to advocate for, to support, to highlight the great diversity we have in town, because we are growing. We're not as homogeneous as we used to be, and that should be a good thing. So CORE is there to amplify those voices and support those groups.
Okay, and I know you had a meeting of CORE last night, and you are debating is in this organization whether or not CORE has a mission to say something regarding this controversy in town. And that's where you're at. Isn't that right?
That is correct. Yes. So we voted that we would have a mission statement. What does that mission look like? That's the next step. What do we want that statement to say?
Okay.
So that's the point that the CORE Commission's at right now.
Great. So I'm going to go back to MJ now. We've already set the stage that the first selectman overstepped his bounds by telling the librarian in that Facebook post to take that book off the shelves. He had no right to do that. As you all said, there is a process for parents, citizens making a complaint about a book. By the way, I know the librarian, Kate. She's been there for over 15 years. She's had one complaint in all of the years that she's been there. And that one complaint has been about a book that was dirty, ratty, not in good form. She accepted the complaint and got rid of the book. I mean, that's what's happened. And she has always said the books that are in the library have already been looked at and determined by library associations, by educators, as to what age groups each book can read. The other thing that you also mentioned, this is the second important part of this, I think, is that beyond saying the book should come off the shelves, and he can't backtrack on that, he said that. He's also said there has to be an inventory. To me, that is the ultimate crime of doing an inventory of books for, quote, I don't think he said sexually explicit. I think he said sensitive content. That to me is probably just as outrageous or more to do a review of books, to seek out sensitive content. How do you do that? It's outrageous. So MJ, another point, and I want you to all comment on it. Parents do have the right to decide when their children are ready for certain materials on racism, on LGBTQ2, on American history, on sexual growing up, right? Parents have that right. Doesn't mean that because a parent doesn't like a specific book for their child, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are racist, a bigot, an anti-LGBTQ person. I think we need, MJ, I want you to help me with this, separate out that concept of parents being able to determine what's good for their children and when their children are ready for materials, and the public's need for information and the freedom of the library and freedom of speech. So MJ, you take it first.
Sure, yeah. So I would go a step further with the language and say not just parents can or should be the ones who are ultimately deciding what sort of content their children take in. I would say it's one of the core parts of being a parent. It's a responsibility. And that doesn't stop at the library and a selection in the library. I believe that transcends all media. And, certainly, and I think this is one of the adjacent points here is, we're really focused on this one book, but there are so much other media out there that arguably in some people's eyes could be, much more troublesome for their young children to take in. So, I think that's all in the eye of the beholder. So absolutely, that is the number one responsibility of the parent. And your child best. You know when they're ready to take in certain types of content and when maybe they're not. Every child is different. And I think the concept of making someone else, specifically the government, making that decision for me as a parent, I take real issue with. The first selectman or any other government official is not in charge of what my child sees and when they're ready to see it. And I want to be the person alongside my husband to be able to make those decisions. And I think every parent has that right and responsibility. And this kind of touches on the overreach piece. The other side of this is there are children and other individuals, youth and older folks who will see themselves in the likenesses of the individuals in these books. RuPaul is one example. As Bernie mentioned, these books are a wide variety of characters that are covered. And of course, all of our other literature features lots of different types of characters. And we want our children to see themselves represented in ways that are respectful and kind and welcoming. And to say that a book that someone may see themselves or their likeness in is sexually explicit or the content is questionable, to make any sort of comments like that and to say that children shouldn't be looking at that is damaging to those individuals who may be ready for that and may actually really relate to it. So that would be my two sides of the coin. One is parents have a responsibility and should all be given that freedom to think and do the right things for their children. And on the other side of that, I want the parent of the child who loves RuPaul and sees themselves in RuPaul to be proud to walk into the library and see that book as part of our collection, as well as lots of other books of different important individuals out there in the world.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. That's kind of what I was getting at and asking the question. The difference between an individual belief that you have within your home, within your family, that you've nurtured for your children, and what the government is doing outside of your home, and they can't tell you what to do. Bernie, I want you to touch on that, and also because of your situation and your thoughts about this. This touches on the whole question of even our Supreme Court and the decisions that they've made recently, doing away with the concepts in the Roe versus Wade case that they overturned, which was the right to privacy, which was the concept that underlay a lot of other decisions, including the Obergefell decision, which granted same-sex marriage rights to all individuals, including rights that did away with our sodomy laws in this country. And so this thing that's happening in Colchester, which is a symbol of manyfold all around the country, in every state, in red states, and now I see in blue states too. How do you feel in terms of your rights being taken away perhaps in the future? I've lived a long time in this world, and we've always had the feeling in America, I've always had the feeling that it's a positive thing. Yes, we may take a couple of steps backward. There are things, but the laws of the Supreme Court decisions, we're always somehow moving forward and improving and being positive. This is the first time I think a lot of people are feeling that some of our rights are taken away. So I want you to talk to us, Bernie, about how you feel about that.
I agree with you. I think that while throughout history, we see, the pendulum swings politically from liberal to conservative and back and forth, that the arc when it comes to rights in America is always expanding. I can't think of any other examples where we see a contraction of rights and civil liberties in this country, at least not coming from the Supreme Court. So the decision on Roe versus Wade was upsetting, but not necessarily surprising, considering the recent makeup of the court. And it does raise questions about what is the future when it comes to other privacy-based rights, including those that would affect people like me in the LGBT community. Is our right to privacy in the bedroom going to be preserved? Is our right to marriage going to be preserved? Those things are now in question. When I was 16 years old, I was living in Colchester. I went to Bacon Academy, and that's when I came out. I was scared going into it, but we were also at a time where we were seeing that a real ramping up in progress when it came to gay rights in America. And so I felt like I was in a good position coming out. I was nervous, but my experience ended up being very positive. It's a very welcoming and inclusive community. This is the first time that I've really felt like those rights could be under threat. And it's why I feel like I have an obligation to speak out. When I was 16 years old, I sort of felt like we were at the culmination of the gay rights movement. The really hard battles had been fought by people who came before me, people who lived through the 50s and the 60s and the AIDS crisis. That the hard work, the really, really hard work had already been put in, and that I was going to kind of have an easy road. And while we may not be seeing that kind of battle now, I feel like I have an obligation, and other people in my shoes have an obligation to speak out, and keep the fight going, because if we don't, there is going to be a rollback of progress. And also, what kind of message does it send to that 16-year-old at Bacon Academy today who sees this situation playing out? Another thing I wanted to touch on, MJ talked about how parents need to be the ones in charge of what media their children have access to. And we talk about, conservative governments, and we say, and I say that the first selectman is, an extreme conservative. But really, when you think about it, there's nothing conservative about bigger government telling you what is and is not appropriate for your child. And the first selectman of Colchester, Andreas Bisbikos, ran on a platform. He said that he was going to put people before government. But when that same person gets into office and says, this is what can and can't be in the children's library, this is what your child can and can't read, that is not putting people before government. That is putting government before people. It's putting government before kids. It's putting government before your rights as a parent.
Right. So it's interesting that I learned that Mr. Bispikos is a teacher of social studies. And I wonder what kind of people are we allowing to teach our children? Now, I know, Amy, you were on the Board of Education, and I want you to speak to this question. I see, again, Colchester is just one example. I see boards of education being swamped by parents demanding that certain books and certain things be in the curriculum and certain things not be in the curriculum, threatening Board of Education members' lives, threatening their children's lives, coming to their home and making threats. I see the same thing happening, and there are articles I've collected all about librarians around the country. They are losing heart. They are leaving their jobs. They are being threatened. They are being forced to take books off the shelves that it's not appropriate. So, Amy, I want you to speak to that issue. There is a culture of fear, a culture of threat, a culture of intimidation. And yes, as Bernie just said, this first selectman is not a conservative. He's a Trumpian, authoritarian, ignorant, impulsive, and you can fill in the blank for the next part of that comment. Amy, let's hear from you.
Well, I don't think you want me to fill in. We'd have to bleep that out. What I see, I haven't been on the Board of Education since last November. The campaign was very much an anti-CRT. It did follow a lot of the national trends. I will say, though, Colchester, as far as I know, I never experienced any threat of violence. It never ratcheted up to that level. The rhetoric was there. You could hear the key terms. So that was evident. But what I think is happening more even than in a culture of fear or violence, it's exhaustion. I mean, I think when you see teachers out and they're, if you see a teacher around town, you're like, thank you for sticking with it. And they're like, it's been so hard. Following the pandemic, following that, bringing kids back in, teachers are exhausted, staff are exhausted, and they don't feel valued. They feel like they just took on the weight of the world and they got a pat on the back. And now it's back to, everyone yelling about how teachers are overpaid or something like that. So I think there is an exodus in the teaching community. It's going to be harder to fill those spots. And things like this do not help because teachers are the people that your kids talk to. They're the ones that, they're like, hey, I'm thinking something, or, they are there just to teach your kids, but they're also there to love your kids, and they do. So if we're starting to talk about books in the library, that's going to make it harder for teachers to have to talk to kids about, it's okay what you're feeling. It's okay, you be who you are. And I just think this type of incident makes their job that much harder, and they don't need that right now.
Right. Well, I agree with you about the level of exhaustion, the level of frustration, and they are working for their livelihoods, and I appreciate that. But there's a part of me, I don't know how others feel, that feels that the teachers are not rising up enough. Maybe the librarians have to rise up. I think we have to give our librarian in Colchester a tremendous amount of credit for her courage in standing up and doing the right thing. And I think statements in support of her are just as important as statements in support of the LGBT community or any other community or level of education that's being attacked in some way, or where censorship in any way is being threatened. The librarians are the first line of defense on that, and Kate is doing a wonderful job. So now I want to turn back to MJ. Tell us about the Banned Books Brigade, how that got started, what it's trying to do, and where we go from here with that.
So the Banned Books Brigade started just sort of as a GoFundMe at first. I've learned in my life that if there's no money, there's no mission, and knew pretty quickly that if we were going to do anything, we would probably need to get some funds to get started. Thus far, we've raised just under $2,000, and the intention to use that money is to work with Kate and the librarian staff, as well as staff in the school system and with local youth, to really find out what the needs are and how we can bring more diverse books into the community and to make those accessible at no charge, whether that's through the public library, through the school library, or through the classrooms, or through some sort of community distribution. The method yet has not been determined, but the intention is to infuse the community with even more diverse book offerings that people will have as citizens of the town of Colchester access to. That sort of took off into a larger group where we've got a Facebook group of about 200 folks who are like-minded and are sharing ideas. And there's been some really creative, cool ideas that have come from that group as well. So we're exploring what else might we do as a bunch of community members to continue to make Colchester a welcoming place, a place where people feel accepted, and not just accepted. I think really embraced. I think that's the duty of a community, is to embrace its one another and its neighbors. And I also wanted to say, Sheila, I agree completely about Kate, and that she truly is the heroine of this story, if you will. But in addition to that, I will say on your comment on teachers, in addition to being tired, I think that there is a lot of fear. I think that there is a lot of intimidation, especially coming from the far-right conservative community. And there is a lot of fear. Folks fear for their livelihoods, for their safety, for their family's safety. And I think that is what stands in the way. And for groups like the Banned Books Brigade or others to come together as a community and bolster those people and prop them up and say, we're going to stand next to you. We're going to help. I think that is really the only way that real change happens. People need to feel supported by their community.
Okay.
And that's why the BBB came into life. So.
All right. And so now I'm thinking, you bring in teachers, librarians. Why not include teachers and the whole school board, the whole education system in the town? And why not have a rally on the green in support of teachers, in support of academic freedom, in support of the First Amendment, in support of librarians? To me, that might make a splash. I don't know, but we like to march, and maybe a march somewhere would be helpful. At least it would let off a lot of steam, give people some enthusiasm. And I mean, what do you think of that? Would you do something like that?
Yeah, I love your creativity. And I'll say I am by no means, this is my first step into anything as far as community organizing, anything along those lines. So I am not an expert, not even a novice, just a concerned citizen. But I do have a skill set in my project management and strategic background that I have to lend forward. And I would be really thrilled to be able to support our frontline folks who are in the trenches when these things happen. They are the face of that library. They're the face of that school, and they're taking the hits on behalf of the rest of us. So I love the idea, Sheila, and I would be all for it. I probably would need some help, but would love to do that.
Okay. So thanks. Let me turn to Bernie now. Let's talk a little politics. So, Bernie, you're on the town committee, the Democratic town committee, as am I. So we know how tough it is in this climate especially coming into November. And a lot of people are predicting a bloodbath by the Republicans. Hopefully, we're thinking maybe some of the Supreme Court decisions, some of the issues around the January 6th committee, maybe Trump and some of his people will get indicted. I hope that might change the trajectory of this race. And locally, of course, we have the Trumpian factor. So I want to know what your thoughts are about the political state in Colchester. You know, they threw out our fantastic first selectman, Mary Byland, who did a wonderful job during COVID, who was really great, and brought us this Trumpian business that maybe we're all tiring of. What do you think of that dynamics of the politics in our community right now? Especially since so many people have gone on either the Facebook or went to that meeting that the selectman had the other night, and most of them spoke against the first selectman. What do you think?
Well, I think that, as I said earlier, America in general has a tendency for the pendulum to swing from one way to the other. And I think that there are certain towns and states where that's especially pronounced. Colchester happens to be one of them. It is, I think, truly a purple town. And I think that it's a community where you are just not going to see one political party truly dominate the other one over the long term. But it is prone, I think, to major waves. In 2019, the Democrats swept every single seat that they could. In 2021, the Republicans swept every single seat that they could. So I don't know what that means for 2023. Does the pendulum swing all the way back, or does it, land somewhere a little bit more in the middle? But I think what's important is that right now, people are getting engaged because of some of the things they're seeing in town that they're not happy with. Some of those may have been people who maybe they voted in the 2021 election. Maybe they voted for the Democrats, but maybe that was all that they did. Maybe they just voted. And now we're seeing some people who, for the first time, are engaging on a bigger level. They are talking to other people. They are attending meetings. They are organizing. And when that happens, they bring in others and they bring out others to vote and to participate. And that's so important because the story of municipal government in so many towns is apathy. And so you could be a really liberal or a really conservative town. And depending on what the issue of the moment is that is exciting, the people who actually turn out for municipal elections, things could vote completely differently than they would in a state or a presidential election. I think that Colchester at its core is a relatively fiscally conservative town, but I also think that it's fairly socially progressive. And I think that this step by the first selectman to wade into the waters of the national culture war is backfiring because I don't think that he was elected by people primarily to do that. I think that people were concerned about economic issues. They were concerned about inflation. They were concerned about the post-COVID economy. And these social things were really in the background. And that may have fired up his base, but I don't think that's what put him over the edge. And I think that if he continues down this path of wading into these social issues that you see on Fox News or Breitbart or in really extreme right-wing media, I think people in Colchester are going to continue to look at that and say, ugh, that's not us. That's not what we want.
Right. All right. So having said that, Amy, let me turn to you and ask you about the next step. So we know that right now, the parent who supposedly initially made the complaint to the first selectman has filed an official complaint. A librarian will be taking it up and making a determination after she reviews it with the children's librarian. And then her determination, in my understanding, goes to the Board of Selectmen for them to review and hopefully give their approval to that determination. So
only if the parent doesn't agree. So if they make their determination and the parent still doesn't agree, then it goes to the Board of Selectmen.
Then it goes to the first. Thank you.
That's my understanding.
That I think that's right. Okay. So then the issue then of the other thing that was as outrageous as what he did in terms of saying take that book off the shelves was the audit business. And in that Board of Selectmen meeting, many of us attended online. We saw that all of the other selectmen, the 4 others, voted to not allow any audit of books in the children's library in Colchester. So that issue is out. And as I saw it, the first selectman himself lost the support of his entire board. His 2 Republican co-members voted against him on that issue and other issues, I may add, over the past several months. And I mentioned in my comments at that meeting that I thought because he had lost the support of his own board, and he had lost the support, I think, of most of Colchester. If we took a vote today, I dare say, this is resignation territory because we don't have recall. We wish we would in Connecticut. We don't have recall of our public officials. What do you think, Amy, about the idea of moving forward to demand that he resign as first selectman?
You know, my mom always had a saying, it's fear the devil you don't know. I think that this is my own personal opinion on this, and I think I'm a little bit more moderate on that. You know, the Board of Selectmen did come together, and that was really heartening. I don't think this is the last episode we're going to see from this first selectman. I do think there'll be other issues, but to see them gel together and use that collective power to kind of right the wrong, I think that will help steady the ship for the next year. It's a year in November when we'll vote again. So he's got 1 more year.
Okay.
I'm not calling for his resignation.
I wasn't thinking of it as something that he's actually going to do. He would never resign. I was thinking of it as another ploy, another strategy in the rage that most of the town, I hope, feels about his behavior. MJ, your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I heard the first selectman say quite plainly that there would be no resignation multiple times.
That's just the point. Yeah, sure.
So oh man, here's what I'll say. I pride myself in being a strong leader, and I spend almost all of my time, especially when I'm leading my teams, in really reflecting and trying to continuously improve, to be a better, more humanistic, more thoughtful leader, and to always put the best interest of those in my charge, and all of those in my charge, at the center of everything that I do. I really pride myself on that. I consider myself a leadership expert. From what I have observed from the first selectman, he has absolutely no business or qualifications being in an elevated position. I don't know what he was like as a teacher. I could make some conjecture and say I probably wouldn't have wanted him teaching my child social studies. But from what I've seen, both in the way that he addresses his own team of Board of Selectmen, in the way that he addresses his citizens, his concerned citizens who come forward with issues, and in the way that he communicates out there in the media and in social media, he has no business being in a leadership position, and he's not qualified. An individual in an elevated position in charge of something important as the well-being of an entire town needs to be held to a higher standard, and he needs to surround himself with people who know what they're doing, who are intelligent, who have experience, who are compassionate, and who can advise him, and that he will actually listen to and take their advice seriously. You know, I heard last night on the core committee meeting over and again, one of the members, not Amy, but another member, say he made an honest mistake. He didn't know the procedure. He made an honest mistake. And even if that's true, which I don't believe that it is, even if that's true, my response to that would be, he is, and he continues to remind us that he is the CEO, the chief executive of Colchester. If you are in a position like that and you're not sure what you should be doing, then it is up to you to stop, to ask, and to find out what the right procedure is, and then proceed. So, he's completely unqualified. He's not a leader, and he's, not someone that I would allow to run my kid's baseball team, never mind a town.
So would you tell him to resign?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But, I mean, to Amy's point, she's right. And I don't know the political climate the way others on this show do. I don't know what that would mean as far as a replacement. And so I do use, that sort of theory too. I actually was just saying that, Amy, to someone else today.
Yeah.
There's the devil you know and the devil you don't know. And so, I think that I would want to understand what would happen then if I were to be very, very serious about that. And I would say absolutely at the next election, this individual is not qualified to be in his position, and he needs to be voted out swiftly.
Okay. So I find it interesting. Bernie's going to tell us what should happen in a second, but I just want to make this point. Resignation is a formal, very important part of government that we don't learn about and have very much in America. Richard Nixon, 50 years ago around this time, resigned. As much as a crook he was, as awful as he was, and the things that he had done, he knew about the proper protocols and the ceremonialization of leaving the government. He had a formal speech, he resigned, he had a formal waving of goodbye, a formal breakfast, and you guys should look at that and take information from that. In America, we just forge ahead mostly, like a Trump. I'm sure we all wanted him to resign. And Amy, we'd love to have really good people surrounding Trump. Really? Are you serious? That's a joke. And compare it to England, where Boris Johnson, the prime minister, just resigned. Why did he resign? He lost the faith of his people because of his lack of integrity. He had parties during COVID in the prime minister's home. Come on. Bernie, I want you to speak to that. And he resigned because of that. He had no more integrity with the people of his country.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. And as MJ pointed out, he has very vocally said that we should not expect that from him. And I'm not calling for that today. However, I do think that we need to continue to look at ways that we can realistically hold him accountable. And I think there's research still to be done on what the options are within our framework of government. I mean, one of the reasons that Richard Nixon resigned was because it was clear his time was up. It was resign or be removed. There's no mechanism to remove a first selectman in Colchester. And so there's no mechanism to really force them to go down the path of resigning with grace or being forced out in disgrace. But that doesn't mean that there aren't tools to hold a first selectman who is repeatedly going rogue accountable. As he frequently says, he is the chief executive officer of the town, but he is accountable to both the Board of Selectmen and to town meeting, which is our form of government. And of course, he's accountable to voters in general. So I think that there may be tools in the arsenal that have yet to be used that could say to him that he has overstepped his bounds a few too many times, and that others are going to assert their powers to rein him back in. And I think we started to see the Board of Selectmen do that this week by putting a stop to this ridiculous audit or inventory of children's books. Again, I just have to emphasize, there are over 20,000 books in the children's department. The number of man hours it would take for taxpayer-funded positions to go through and rescreen all of those books, that is not a conservative use of town dollars.
Right. Okay. Let's take a final round. I want you to give me your synopsis of what has happened, what's being done about it, and what the future holds. And I would just comment in advance of that you've all mentioned the thing that to me is the most serious in this country, as bad as banning books and asking for audits. The idea that people cannot go about their work without fear of retribution, without intimidation, without their lives being threatened and their families' lives being threatened. I think Trump heightened that fear and brought that to us. And to me, that is the worst thing that's happening in our country today. So with that, I will start with Amy. Give us all of your synopses and your final thoughts on where we go from here. What we also can do now, what you say you will do and what other citizens should be doing.
I think this is definitely the right step. That's a good question, because what can an ordinary person do? You speak up when you see something. This has been actually a silver lining for Colchester, to bring it to the forefront and to see everyone rallying behind it and to see it backfire. Is that? I don't think that's me. I think we just keep being vocal. We get out and vote in the next elections. I know that's, further away, but make sure that we turn this anger and energy into a positive outcome next November, to get the town on the right step, put the town back in the right direction.
Let's turn to MJ now for your final thoughts. What shall we do?
Yeah, so, absolutely, I agree with Amy. Continue to speak up and to vote, but I don't think it stops there, because I think, to the point that's been made, this is happening in Colchester right now, and this is one incident of multiple, but it's happening everywhere in the country. And those of us who are intently bothered by this and who do not want that for the future of our country, these sort of unwelcoming, hateful, vitriol-filled, individuals in positions of power, I think that there's more to be done. And I turn to the people who are most impacted by this, which are people in marginalized communities, people that identify in the LGBTQIA+ community, people who identify in the BIPOC community, women, and our youth. And I do want to make a point about our youth. I know that often, historically at least, older generations sort of poo-poo the next generations coming up behind them, and can often be quite critical. I actually see the next generation coming behind the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, to be a beacon of hope and light. I really see that they approach so much differently than even when I was growing up and just a generation before. And I want to hear from them too. This is going to be their town and their community and their world. And I think that there's untapped energy to harness there. So I think, as far as next steps, I'm going to continue from a grassroots perspective to talk with people, to work to get some additional literature into our community, make sure we're supporting our teachers and our librarians, and to make sure that I'm creating safe spaces for those who need it, and they know that they're embraced and welcomed and loved in my corner of the world. But I also think that we need to tap into the youth, because I think that they have a lot to say, and that they can be a really, really powerful impetus and lever of change. So I guess that's where I would leave my final thoughts. Don't count them out. I think we actually need to bring them closer.
Okay. Thank you, MJ. We will look forward to see what the Banned Books Brigade is doing, and what CORE is doing, Amy, on your end. And now I'll turn to Bernie for your final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Sheila. I think I tend to agree with MJ about the need to continue to reach out with and engage people across a variety of communities that exist in our town and country. And also, when it comes to that next generation, I mentioned earlier my experience coming out and feeling like that sort of the battle had already been fought and won by others. And I feel like I'm doing this now because somebody needs to continue standing up so that others have the same opportunities that I have. I want Gen Z and generations after them to have the same kinds of comforts and safety that I did. But also, part of that means them fighting for themselves. And I know that they want to. I mean, we see that it is a socially engaged generation here in Colchester. Perhaps this issue will be a lightning rod for them. I have seen the engagement from people who, there's just not a lot of people who, in their late teens and early 20s are really engaged with the kind of down and dirty municipal politics that happens and what municipal government is until something like this happens. It makes them see and just how much influence your local government can have in your life, and also how much control you as a citizen can potentially have by stepping up and saying, this is the kind of community I want to live in. When it comes to national stuff, there's things that we can all do and we can all try and we should do. And I don't want to discount the importance of voting or organizing on national issues, but the country is big and there's only so much you can do as one person. It's just the reality. But in small towns like this, one person, a few people can have a lot of influence and can make a lot of change. There are meetings that happen in towns like this that not a single member of the public attends. There's no eyes on certain things that are going on. There's no voice from the citizens speaking up at some of them. So I hope that this issue and others like it will get more people to continue to come out as they have over the last few weeks and be engaged, not just observers, but participants in their local government now through this year, next year, when we hit those 2023 November municipal elections, and ideally beyond it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all on the screen. I want to thank you very, very much, Amy D'Amica, MJ Lawton, Bernie Denler, for your passion on this issue and other issues, of course, and for your involvement, for your enlightenment today. And I hope people will pick up the torch that you are leading with to do these things. And Bernie, I agree with you. The local level of government is often the most important in setting things about where you live, how you are educated, the lights in your house, so many things that we lose sight of when we're just voting on national elections. So I second everything you've all said. It's great to have you on. We'll see everyone next time on Talkback. Bye, and thank you again.
Thank
Bye.
you.